Sam McClure, welcome to the Dyl Friends podcast, my friend.
Hello, Dyl. I'm very excited for this, albeit a little bit apprehensive about being the interviewee.
Well, that's the case.
You sure I can't just interview you?
No.
Okay.
No.
Right.
Firstly, I'm not noteworthy enough to be interviewed anymore. I have nothing interesting going on.
Oh, the podcast.
Well, yes, but this was funny because I was thinking today. Obviously, you're one of the best journos in Australia.
Oh, come on.
But we say, you know, a lot of players can sometimes get upset with journos, but I had a pretty good relationship with journos. I never really got written about at all, and nothing negative at all. It was more just the fact that really hurt me about journalism was at the end of the year. This really hurt me, and I want to get to the bottom of who makes these up. Was those articles where it was like safe, like recontract or cut. And I reckon every fucking year they just had me on that D list. And I was just like, fuck me.
You know,
like, I don't get written about at all, but when you do, you're just saying like, you want to delist me?
And the worst thing is not just the words, it's the symbols they put next to them. So, yeah, it's a big
red X.
It's a big cross.
It's like, we get
it's
it.
Like,
everyone knows what that means.
Nothing positive has ever been associated with the big cross. You want to be the green tick.
Exactly. And it never really happened. So I suppose...
I think we do less of those now, I think.
Well, I hope we should.
Because all the information is so quick now. So, like, who breaks stories about delistings? The club's like, are you delisted?
And if you're getting delisted as well, no one really cares about you. And shout out to anyone who's been delisted this year. I care about you, but I'm saying everyone else, not really. Mate, as I touched on, biggest name in AFL media. Okay, putting it out there. You're on Channel 9 with
That's right.
Footy Classified, SEN Sports today, Sportsday, and The Age.
Yep.
Okay, three big ones, three big kahunas. But mate, you're in my world now.
I'm not comfortable.
This is podcasting.
I feel very anxious, actually.
This is your episode. This is my show.
Okay.
Okay. So I just want to make that clear straight away. Don't think that this is going to be roles reversed.
No.
You're on. Mate, what's been happening? How's your life been?
Life's been good, yeah. I mean, I've been one of the lucky ones throughout COVID because I can literally take my job anywhere as long as I've got a laptop. I mean, radio's been a little bit harder. Mm-hmm. Doing 8 weeks of daily radio with actually no football on was, I think back and like, how did we get through that? What did we actually talk about? But yeah, I mean, writing's been good. Still been doing a bit of TV, which has been fun. I've been getting through it, mate. I'm a bit of a caged animal at home, to be honest. When we're in first lockdown, you know, it's like, we're having some fun. And second lockdown, I was like, I'm going to drive myself crazy and drive my partner crazy, which is probably the more important thing.
I've seen as well, you've been having some toys. You've got some toys that you've sort of invested. Is this like a bit of a midlife crisis? Or is this,
what
you've
toys?
got the motorbikes? One of your motorbikes. You've got this Harley. I've
can't
seen you
believe we're
literally
getting into
walking down, riding this big Harley Thrug bike down, doing this chap laps up and down Chapel Street.
That's not true. I've never taken it.
You've got leathers nearly. It's unbelievable.
That's for safety.
Mate, you're meant to be a journo.
No, I'm a bit different. I'm a little bit different. I don't think many people actually know that. Yeah, just see me as this, you know, sort of guy who grew up loving footy and now's a journo and trying to ruin people's lives. But I'm a bit weird. I love different things. Like, you know, the first thing I did on my last day of TV, which is a couple of weeks ago, the first thing I did the next day is just go to the hairdresser and just get a ridiculous haircut. Yeah. Like, just because I could, you know, like I didn't have to be on TV. I didn't have to be, you know, showing up for anything. Yes. And I've always been obsessed with engines. Like, I'm a bogan at heart, trust me.
Talk us through some of those. Because I've heard about a few of these. And some of these aren't, like, when you say you're a rev head, like, no offence, but they're not like the coolest cars.
Yeah, it's not like I'm Charlie Dixon in my garage
like,
fixing 1971 GTRs.
You're more like Fast and Furious Tokyo Drifts.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah, I had a little red Toyota 86. You know, remember those things you see around?
No, I don't. I don't think
it was like a little 2-door sports car, right? And I could barely fit in it, let alone anyone else. My partner, Nisha, we were in the early stages, you know, first couple of years. Yep. And I had that car. And she went away with her family for 3 months. And she came back and we were in the garage and she went, I was living in a share house at the time. Whose car is this? I was like, no, it's, I sort of went and bought it. It's this pale blue. I think the official colour is called a hyper blue Subaru Wrx.
Oh my God.
With one of those, so I'd been lowered in big black rims, had this big spoiler on the back. Like, to the point where, like, if you looked in the rear vision mirror, you couldn't actually see anything but the spoiler.
When would you ever think that was cool?
I'm weird, you know? Like, but I loved it. Yeah, like, I just loved it.
Can you see back now how people would have thought, probably not, or you still like it?
Oh, yeah. No, I got rid of it.
Okay, good.
I think, Nisha won that battle.
Good. Well, this actually moves into the next point because this is a little bit awkward because, and I haven't called any lawyers. We'll get into that later. Doing research as I do, last night I go on your Instagram.
Oh no.
And
I've got to shut that thing down.
I see your bio, and your bio says be yourself. Everyone else is taken. Now, that's fine because that's
I think it's quite nice.
It's a great quote. It's one of my favourite quotes. But did you know that that's the quote of this show? And it has been since the becoming of the show. Legitimately.
You haven't mentioned it on other episodes, have you?
It's just kicking the teeth to me. This is disrespect.
When was the last episode you mentioned this on?
It's so ingrained. It doesn't have to be mentioned anymore.
No, I actually didn't know that, and I'm embarrassed to sit here today.
Wow. Okay, we'll move on from that then.
I don't even know where I saw it.
Yeah, well, it's a good quote.
Been there for years.
Oscar Wilde. It's a funny one, be yourself, everyone else, but it's true when you think about it deeply. It's actually correct because you can only be who you are.
Yeah, so I embrace the inner Tokyo Drift bogan in me.
Fantastic. Mate, let's get into the show because I thought we've been chatting about this for a while. We've been lucky enough to know each other through a few mutual friends. Your beautiful sister Mads, who used to work at Carlton, and our close friend Luca Ganano, who's just the goat of radio producing.
Yep.
I suppose it's an interesting dynamic being like an person on a list to, you know, a journo talking about a few things that's in the AFL world. Because for me, as I said earlier, journalism's never really struck me too much because there was nothing to write about, which is a good and bad thing, I suppose. But it really is polarising for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's a hard gig, I think, from the outside because in the AFL and even just in general, people want news, but people only want good news. And when you give people good news, they love you. But if you give someone news that they probably don't agree with, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
It's a tough gig. So firstly, what's your opinions on AFL media? I know that's a very broad question opening, but what do you think it's a bit like at the moment and how have you found it this year especially?
Yeah, I think it's out of control, to be perfectly honest. I think it's gotten to a point where everyone just wants their information. So, and I'm saying, I'm not blaming the people who digest it, you know, because it's the whole chicken and the egg thing. But we've got to a point, I think, with social media and the way that people get their information, that any little tidbit, right, that comes out, not only is it reported by everyone at the same time, but it's also accepted as fact as soon as one person says it. I've often joked about this with people at work that, let's just say we tweeted something, you know, make up a story, just tweet it. How many other media outlets do you think would report it right before someone worked out it's actually not true?
Yeah.
Like if you actually call the person involved, it's actually not true. And so, but that's where we've got to. And I don't know how we got there, but we're here. And it, like, forget whether it makes my job harder or easier. I just feel for the people that we write about and that we report about, you know, like, I think that's the biggest thing for me in the last, you know, because I got into radio when I was 18, so I was a kid, you know, and going through a lot of different things in my life at the time. Now, at 29, you know, a decade later, my whole perspective has completely flipped on its head. I used to just think, you know, like, these players, they earn $1 million, you know, they should be held to a higher account. If you don't like it, don't get into the industry. And now I'm the opposite. And it's just like, you know, I've built some relationships with some of these players and seen how tough their lives are, not only during footy, but away from footy, right? And the pressure that's put on them. And now I think, wow, you know, like, we're too harsh at each end of the spectrum. We build these guys up to be bigger than the Prime Minister when they kick a goal to win a game. And then as soon as they make a mistake, be it they miss a pass or they stuff up off field or whatever, we villainise them, you know? And it's like, no wonder that mental health in society is becoming a bigger issue because, you know, I think if you chat to anyone in psychology or psychiatry, they talk about the roller coaster of emotions, and you don't want to ride the roller coaster. No. The highs and the lows, you want to make sure the difference between them is the smallest that it can be. So in answer to your original question, I think that we're in a really dangerous part in sports journalism, particularly in footy. You know, there's just too much out there, and there's such an appetite for it, you know, as well. Is it
competitive as well? Like, are you always finding that with journos, obviously you've established yourself now, but that's been through, you know, a long journey of study and working your way up through the ranks. But now is it like a feeling of like younger people just want to go bang and just break a story straight away and get to the top and pass someone and just sort of shock people? Is that a prevalent sort of thing?
I think so. And like, I was like that when I was a kid, you know, when I was 22 and wanted to take on the world and rah, rah, rah. But now I wonder if you ask my 10 best friends or 10 people that knew me the best, is Sam competitive? I bet you they'd all say yes. But when it comes to work, I'm really not. Like when Tom Morris or Tom Brown or Sam Landsberger or Daniel Tooney or one of these guys breaks a story, my first instinct is great.
Yep.
Because the more that we break real and meaningful stories that actually hold weight, the better we're seen throughout the industry, I think. And players pick up a story, and even if some of them don't like it, as long as it's factual and it's true and it's written in a way that's responsible, I think that's great for our craft. It's when we make mistakes or like we go too hard with an opinion that ends up backfiring, or we say something that ends up being actually factually wrong. That hurts us. So I'm competitive like everyone else, but I never really think to myself, damn, he got that story and I didn't. Unless I'd been working on the same thing at the same time, and geez, it's who tweets it first. Is he 16 seconds in front of me? Like, is he going to get the credit? Like, I actually don't think like that. I'm sure that people think that we do.
I would, but I feel like if that was my job, I would. You'd want to get that out. Like,
yeah,
when you're writing a story, say you're doing a piece and you've got something in the works. Do you know if someone else is also doing that as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think about this all the time, actually.
Yeah.
No, you never know. You never know.
Because we'll get into a few of your big stories later, and I'm just wondering, when you're preparing for these things and these big things that are dropping, it's funny if you think, fuck, I'm on a timeline here, I've got to get this done, or you're the only person that's doing it.
I reckon it depends on the story. Like sometimes you'll know that there's just no way how you've got the story and what the story is. There's no way that there's someone else working on this unless that person has gone and told another journal, which is unlikely. Yeah. But then there's stuff that that you're on a timeline. So like I reckon at the start of this year, I think it was before COVID hit, someone called me and said, mate, there's a big story here in Sydney. Buddy Franklin has just leapt off the training field and he basically had to be carried off by 3 blokes. Like he's torn his hamstring that badly. I was like, okay, well, that's been seen by too many people, right? Like, there's everyone on the list. All they have to do is tell a mate or tell
their mum,
tell a girlfriend, or like it just gets out. Then there's trainers, and then the day that Johnny Patton did his last knee at GWS, that story only came out because a construction worker who was working 200 metres away saw him go, because he made such a thud because he's such a big bloke. Yeah, and he looked over and Johnny Patton's on his knee again. He texted a bloke who called me, and then I rang the club.
Wow.
Yeah, like this is how...
I don't believe that, because I don't think in Western Sydney anyone knows who the fuck we were when we were training.
Yeah, but it could have been a...
No, I know, anyway. But that's actually really interesting. So when that happened, is that actually how it works? You've just got people around...
Then you got to check things, right? Yeah. Because there's so much stuff. Like I reckon 80% of the stuff that I get told's wrong.
Right.
So you got to siphon through it. It's frustrating. It's part of it. But yeah, so with the Franklin one, I was like, I've got to make sure it's right, but we've also got to get this out, but then it's how you word it, because the guy who told me he's done it really badly and he had 3 blokes carrying him off, Chinese whispers, maybe it was only just one trainer and he was just kind of walking off and he's only just pulled it and he's going to play this week. Like there's fine lines that make big differences with stories. So then it's how you word it. You give yourself safeguards. Yeah. Lance Franklin has appeared to injure himself at training. The exact circumstances are unknown. He's going for a scan. You broaden it. So just on that as well, like you said, then you've got to have clarification. You've got to call the club on these things. Oh, again, it's hard. Bane of my existence calling clubs. They wouldn't like that, I can imagine. No one ever answers when you need them to. But how many sort of confirmations do you actually have to run with a story? Or does it depend, like you said, on the wording of it? Yeah. If you know something's sort of bubbling, and I feel like this might be why, and again, it's hard to talk specifics. We're not talking about a specific case here. Like it's just in general. Yeah. How many sort of people do you have to confirm with? And I suppose that's what I'm thinking now is why some people would get annoyed with journalists, because they go, oh, are they, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, are they actually sure this happened, or are they just taking a hunch that something's happened? Yeah, well, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but take the Franklin one. Would some journos have printed that based on the conversation that they had with their source, who apparently saw it? Maybe, I don't know. But I had to be sure. Like, you take everything into consideration. It's arguably the biggest player in the game, biggest profile player in the game. And you had to check with the club. So I rang, I think it was Charlie Gardner at the time, was head of footy, and he actually gave me a quote. So as soon as you've got something on the record, I think that's your confirmation. That's all that you need. If you don't have stuff on the record, you need to get multiple people saying that you're right. Because if you're just basing it on one person that's not willing to go on the record and put their name to something, then ultimately it's your name that becomes muddied if you get something wrong. So it's all risk versus reward. Like that's the whole craft is. And the other thing is picking and choosing. And I had some interesting situations this year where people accused me of picking and choosing. That's the whole thing is picking and choosing in my eyes. Like if I wrote everything that I knew to be true, then geez, there'd be some interesting stories out there. But everything's about perspective and is the juice worth the squeeze? Is always the question I ask myself. There's a story about a player doing this and this. Is it worth writing? Even though it's right, it's right, but it could ruin his career, or it could mean that he's suspended for 4 weeks. Did he deserve to be? No, probably not. I'm learning all the time. So I always find that asking yourself questions when you have a story is the best outcome.
That's a really interesting point. It's something that's obvious, and I don't know if a lot of people would think this, but the amount of stuff that would come across your desk, and then the amount of stuff you actually go with, as you just said before, how many stories would you let slide?
Yeah, I reckon it's 8 in 10. Yeah, I reckon it's 8 in 10.
And is that because...
When you say let slide, some of them end up being wrong. Yeah.
Okay.
So say you get 10 stories.
Yeah. Say there's times, obviously, through your career and you've got good relationship with a lot of players. There's been times where you've gone, no, I don't want to run with that because this could harm in some way.
The relationship.
Yeah. It's hard as well because you're doing really well with your relationship there with the player, but then you're actually hurting your relationship with other media people. Yeah. Is that what it is? It's like the toss-up? Or
no, it's not really a toss-up.
I
don't really tell... apart from my editor, I don't really tell other journos what I've got or what I'm working on unless you've got really close relationships. But I remember when I was starting at the age, so I would have been 23 or something like that, Caro said to me, your job is not to make friends here. Your job is to find stories, make sure that they're accurate and write them as precisely as you can. And everything else is just noise. Now that sounds great in theory, and Caro has been so successful because she is so fearless.
Extremely impressive. Like she's so...
But she's so strong,
she's consistent.
Mate.
It's like she doesn't care who you are. Like she's, if she's got an opinion, she'll do it. And that's you've got to respect that in a way.
And I love the people that come up to me. This happens so much more than you think it would. Yeah. Just be like, they ask me what I do and... Oh, what do you think about that Caroline Wilson? I just reckon I just cut them off before they can finish. No, actually, I get on really well with it. I really like it. Yep, she's one of my, she's just someone that I look up to. So anyway, getting back to what Caro said, she's forged an amazing career because of statements like that. That without fear or favour, she just goes. She goes hard. I have found that, and maybe I'll grow into it. I don't know. I have found that particularly difficult the last few years, because I think the biggest asset in the game of footy is its players. Without the players, there is no game. So I've tried to build as many relationships with players as I can. And also, I'm now around the same age as a lot of the players are, and some of the senior players. And, we all make mistakes. We all do things we wish we shouldn't have. We all get into fights with clubs about money disputes or, I always try to see the person in the story, but sometimes that clouds your judgment and it's really hard. Other times, and I find players are the best with you if you're going to write about them. I've just made this rule the last 3 years. If you're writing about someone, you have to call them. You have to. Even if they don't answer, even if they don't want to speak to you, you got to try to call them and just say, hey, Dyl, sorry to bother you. I'm sure the last person you want to hear from is a journo, but I'm writing about the fact that this week you're getting dropped and, it's been... right. and I just wanted to, let you know that this is... And I get varying responses. Yeah. Some are, roll whatever you want, mate. Please don't call me again. Bang. Yeah. Others are, thanks for talking to me. Thanks for ringing me. No one's ever rang me before. Yeah. I won't comment if that's okay. And then there's the one that's like, I'm happy to talk to you, this is the reason I'm getting dropped. And I love what I do, but I find it really challenging on a personal level. And there's been some stories that, you know, I haven't slept with because I think, you know, is it my duty to report this, or is it my duty to not protect, but to understand and empathise with these players? And I think ultimately the answer is in the middle. But yeah, I look at people like Caro and I look at people like Jake Nile and Mick Warner, and I'm just like, these guys are unbelievable. You know, like I've been doing this since I was 18, you know, really, and I'm still asking for advice. I still feel like a kid, really.
One thing that I probably think about a little bit with story writing and journalism is like, these stories are going to come out. It's not like they're not known.
Yeah.
So it's like, I understand people get upset when stories do come out, but realistically, someone's going to break that.
Yep.
Like it's not going to stay in anyway. Do you ever think about that?
Yeah, and I say that to every person that I speak to with a big story that they don't want to come out. Is that like there's just too many people that know about this. If I know about it, it's a fair chance that other people know about it. Why don't you speak to me? I'll give you the fairest appraisal and the fairest story possible. And then once you've spoken, you don't speak to anyone else. It's done. You know, like that's a constant conversation. There's only in my 11 years, there's only been one story that I've known about that I thought would come out, and it didn't.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's still not out.
Nah. And I think about it every week.
Let's talk about it.
Nah. Oh, wow. Oh, jeez.
So how, I don't even want to break
And I've never told anyone about it.
It's good. I don't even want to know what it is because I don't like knowing secrets because I'm not good at keeping them.
Nor am I.
How long ago was this? Like it's a footy thing?
Yeah, in the last 5 years.
Wow.
Yep.
Cool. Don't even know where to start with it. Well, that sounds interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay. No, but it's like, yeah, what I find what I do really hard, and I'm not saying that it is hard, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't get into it. Not at all. I'm just saying on a personal level, you know, and I think, and you could probably attest to this, you see your life and you see your job through different lenses based on what you're going through at the time in your other part of your life, I reckon. And then, you know, like as a 22-year-old, I'm a different person to what I'm as a 29-year-old. So I see things completely differently. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, like, you know, what do you want to do? I just want to break stories. If you'd asked me now, what do I want to do? I want to listen to stories.
Yeah.
You know?
Your ideal sort of role now be like journalism, like writing articles, writing stories?
Yeah. And that might be outside of sport ultimately, you know. I don't know. When I was little, all I wanted to do was tell people stories. You know, that's all I wanted to do. And I used to love listening to stories. And like if my parents ever took me to the theatre, like I'd just obsessed with someone telling me a story. The same, I'd go to the movies. Like, so just for me, it just became about stories. And then, you know, going right back to what you asked me about at the start is, you know, where we're at in footy media. Sometimes I think to myself, maybe I do need a break, or maybe, you know, just for a couple of years pivot and do, you know, when I started at 3AW, I was doing police rounds and courts and all that sort of, and I loved it because it was different. So yeah, ultimately I just want to hone my craft as a journo. That's all I want to be. That's all I've ever wanted to be. So I think I'll just continue to do that. What that looks like going forward with footy, I'm not sure.
Let's talk about that quickly because I know it's a massive part of your life. Why journalism?
Yeah. So yeah, my old man Jeff was a journalist, and he was an editor and then a sports journalist and then a writer. And so when I grew up, that's kind of all I ever knew. And we talk about stories. Like my first memories as a kid are my parents telling stories at the dinner table. That's as far back as I can remember, you know. And I still have visions as a kid of being driven around in the car and just in the back, not being able to see who was driving. Obviously, you know, it was mum or dad, and just listening to stories. And that's what it became for me. And then when I was old enough to go to the footy, I'd go with dad, you know, and he was, unfortunately, he was a Carlton supporter because it meant that I had to become a Carlton supporter and endure the pain of the last 20 years. And so, like, you know, the amount of questions I get, are you related to Mark McClure? It's like, no, I'm not. We actually spell our name differently. It's not the same McClure. But Mark and my dad, Jeff, were actually good mates. So it was quite funny at the time. Yeah. They used to joke about who spelt the name wrong and right. But yeah, like my earliest memories of footy was being next to dad after the siren had gone, MCG, Princess Park, Waverley, wherever, and just being in the rooms after. Back in the day when you didn't really need accreditation, they could just sneak kids in. And I kind of like just stand in the corner and watch Steve Kernahan and Craig Bradley walk past and Stephen Silvani. And so, before I even kind of knew it, like I was ensconced in sports journalism. So that's probably where it started. And then, so Dad got sick when I was 15 and he had a pretty long and torturous battle with cancer and he died when I was 18. So that was a tough period of my life because, you're a young man, you're growing up, you feel like you're older than you are. And then half your life gets kind of ripped out right in front of you, and the hardest thing is that he was sick for so long that people kind of expected that I had the chance to say goodbye to him or, like that I had some sort of closure. But it was still one day he was there and the next day he wasn't, And so I was 18 then and I was just finished school, just going into uni. And I didn't want to be a journalist at this stage. Like I was interested in it, but I wanted to be an actor. Like I loved theatre. I was in several musicals in school.
Nah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Trust me. I wish I did that, but keep going.
So I was obsessed with theatre, right? I did drama and theatre studies at school, all that sort of stuff. So as soon as I left school, I tried out for NIDA and in Sydney and the VCA here in Victoria. Didn't get into either.
Really?
Yep. And I still was like, oh, it's fine. I'll be an actor. And then, my sister was living overseas at the time, Maddie. And so it was just me and Mum. And Mum was like, old school parents. Just like, okay, well, you better find a job to, to have money. It's like, yeah, good point. So I rang around different radio stations and actually that's how Luca got me my first start in journalism. He was producing Tom Elliott on the Weekend Break and they needed someone to come in and answer the phones. And I was like, great, And so I came in and answered phones and met Tom. And then all of a sudden I was OB assistant, which was outside broadcast assistant. So literally my job was they gave me $100 in an envelope and they'd sent me out to wherever it was. So it was Federation Square because Neil Mitchell's doing an OB from there, an outside broadcast. Whatever Neil or his guests need at any stage, you go get it for him, pay with his cash, keep the receipts, write down everything, give us the change afterwards. I was like, great, awesome. Like I did that for 6 months. Like my job was literally sitting in the back of the caravan. Yeah. And then someone was like, where's that kid? Can I get a strong latte, please? Can I get a... Yeah, no worries. Yep. And so I did that for all the different shows. But you know what? The great thing it did is it introduced me to people. Sort of like, so 3 months later, they were like, oh, Sam's here. We'll get Sam to go get a sandwich. And so 6 months later, they needed someone permanently to answer phones on shows. Then they needed someone to produce. Then a spot came up in the newsroom and I was studying journalism at the time. And I was like, well, what better way to learn? And so then I went into a radio newsroom and worked there for a few years and it just went from there. It accidentally kind of gathered momentum. Like, this... where I've got to today isn't some long plotted idea of what I want to do. It just kind of evolved.
But you've done the runs on the board, and I suppose that's what's the biggest part, isn't it? Like I literally followed in your footsteps of that. Like when I finished at Carlton, I went and worked at 3AW answering the phones. Yeah, which is just like
name a suburb. It's John from Roval, mate.
It sucks. Like it is so hard. It is so hard.
It's
all
these
people want to do is just
complain,
and you're just like, oh my god, what the hell? Like, it's a very tough job.
It actually is
very tough job. Yep. But you learn so much, as you said, and it's a really good start. And you obviously did it really well, mate. Better than I did. Anyway, I didn't last that long. I'm 99% sure I got sacked, but it was really a funny story.
You and me both.
Funny story for another time. What was your first big story? Do you remember breaking your first big story?
I don't know if this was my first, but it was certainly early on when I started at The Age. It was, I remember, if I could only tell you where this story came from, it would make the story so much better, but I can't because this guy's still around. But I was speaking to someone, not about footy, right? And he said, oh yeah, Gary Ablett is, he's tried to leave, tried to go back to Geelong. And I was like, sorry? What do you mean he tried to go back to Geelong? Like, he's their captain. This is when he didn't leave Gold Coast. This is before when he tried to leave. So I remember I rang someone at Gold Coast In fact, you know who I rang? I rang Rodney Eade. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I was working on the story with Caro, because when I was this age, right, I'd get a story and I'd be like, what am I going to do with this?
Yeah.
What am I going to do? I don't have all the context. So I used to like go to Michael Gleeson and Jake Noel and Caro and be like, this is the story that I've got. Can you help me? And she said, just call Rodney Eade. Just call him and put it to him. Did Gary Ablett try to leave? And Rocket answered straight away. It's like, Sam McClure from the Age newspaper in Melbourne. Hey, g'day, Sam. I'm just working on this story that Gary Ablett, he tried to... he wanted to trade back to Geelong, but we just said no.
He just gave it to you.
But like, you know what though? Like that's who Rocket is.
Yeah, just
honest and like had relationships with the media and so Caro and I wrote this story that was on the back page, and it's my first back page story. And it was like Gary Ablett has tried to bail out of the Gold Coast Suns and asked for a trade home to Geelong, and it was thwarted by the Suns, who refused to trade him. And it was a big story for like 3 days. And I remember waking up the next morning and it was on radio. Like I think they were talking about it on SEN. And I was like, I knew it was a good story, but I didn't think it had. And they got his manager on, and Liam Pickering got asked by Hutchie about it a few days later on radio. And Pickers said something to the effect of, well, I'm glad to see that Caro and Sam are only 8 weeks behind, or something like that. You know,
even that wasn't
he was expecting people to get it. So that gave me a real kind of, what it showed me was that there's lots of stories out there. And just because you haven't heard of them, like the best stories you haven't heard.
Just on that, breaking a story, what does that actually... Does it just give you probably like the more of the notoriety of breaking the story, or does it actually, when someone talks about it after, they have to say this was broken by?
Yeah, I don't think it's the second part. Like some do, some don't, which is fine either way. I think it's just newspapers to me, you know, like when I was growing up, we had a long path that went down the side of our house. And used to, in the morning, I'd go down and get the Herald Sun and the Age. This is before Twitter and Facebook and all that sort of stuff. Come into the house, go to the kitchen bench. You remember the plastic they were rolled in? And sometimes I get
to do the paper round.
Right. Well, sometimes I get so frustrated with the plastic, like I just get the scissors or like a big knife and just rip through it. And then my dad used to do this thing where like he'd fold the paper in half one way and he'd put a big crease in his hand, and then he'd fold it the other way, big crease, so I'd straighten it out. And all I'd do straight away is I'd flip from front to back on both papers, and usually there'd be a back page lead by Mike Sheehan and back page lead by Caroline Wilson, and I'd read both and I'd be obsessed because I knew that they were giving me information that I didn't already have. And when I started on Sportsday with Jared Healy, my first stint at 3AW, he just used to say to me, as long as you can come on air and give me one piece of information that I didn't already know, you've done your job. And so that's what I used to try to do, is that like, forget breaking stories and trying to be first. Like, I think that's the byproduct of what you're doing. What you're doing is actually providing people with information about what you're writing that they didn't already know before.
What about the pressure of that though? If and I again, I'm a bit naive to how journalism works. So I'm assuming every week would Mike Sheehan and Caroline Wilson have to have a story?
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot, and it's completely fair. No is the answer.
No.
Like, there's more pressure on chief footy writers because they're supposed to be across the big issues. But there are many days that go past for me at the age that I don't write anything.
Yeah. So does that mean...
But I've made 16 phone calls and I've written 4 pages of notes. And
well, you probably don't want to be... If you're doing too many articles, it might not be the right thing. You might be missing out on other things or...
And this comes back to what you asked me at the start about where are we at the moment. I think that a lot of blame goes to young journos coming through who want to be part of the industry and just writing stuff. Whatever it is, just write stuff that'll get people interested, it'll go on the blog, whatever it is. What you got to remember is that they're answerable to bosses that are saying, we need X amount of stories to provide X amount of clicks to show our advertisers that
money's there.
Right.
Yeah.
I am blessed because I have the best boss in the entire world, Chloe Salto, who's my sports editor.
Shout out.
Who, she knows if I go 3 days without writing a story, she'll be like, that's all right. I know he's made the calls. I know there's something in the works. I know that, he's doing the work. But if there's not a story there, I don't want you to write it.
Yeah.
So I try to make And when you're young and you haven't got the contacts, you just go to press conferences because that's a way of getting content and making contacts. But now I just try to wait for the bigger stories to look into and try to investigate. And, there's been stories that have taken me 18 months.
Have you got anything in the works at the moment?
I do. Yeah, I do. I think it'll be interesting and newsworthy.
When will that be? Like, is it a timeline?
It depends when this person sits down and talks to me.
Oh, okay. So it's someone you've got to get down. Yeah. Jeez, it's so interesting. So interesting. I just don't know what that is.
It's hard, and depending on the person. Like it's sometimes you got to be the most annoying person in the world.
Yeah.
Like I've got a guy that at the moment I literally text the same word to him every day, just as a reminder. And he laughs, like he's fine with it. It's not. I'm not creepy.
Yeah, okay. Sounds a bit creepy.
And there's other people that I'll just be like, come on.
Yeah,
it's time you talked. You're gonna have to talk at some stage. Come on. Why don't you just come talk to me?
Let's watch this space.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your career. What are some of your most proudest moments in your journalism career? Some of the stories you've broke. I know there's some really big, exciting ones that I've got here, but is there anything else stick out to you?
No, I mean, I'm not trying to avoid the question, but I really, apart from a couple that stand out, I don't think too much about stories that I've written because my co-host Jared Healy, which by the way, on my Instagram, before it was be yourself, everyone else is taken. Be
Jared Healy.
Before that quote, it was something else. It was, and I was thinking about getting this tattooed actually, although my mum would actually she'd just murder me if I got a tattoo, which was never drop in, never look back. So Jared, for those who don't know, and he'd probably hate me saying this publicly, is a avid surfer, like insane surfer. And I've actually gone down to Bells and watched him surf, and he goes out further than the young guys.
Seriously, would not have ever pictured that.
No, like every day, surfs harder and faster and bigger waves than anyone. He told me one day, I thanked him for a story. He gave me a tip on a story, and I wrote it. And I thanked him one day, and he just looked at me and said, never drop in, never look back. And he never explained what it meant, but so I decided to do it for myself. And I was like, never drop in. So like if someone's on a wave, let them have, that's their wave, right? Let them do their thing. And never look back, I took as when you come off a good wave, don't spend the next 30 seconds thinking about how good that wave was, because you probably miss the next one. So I think about that every day, to be honest. So when you talk about what are my proudest moments are just being on a show. Like when I was a kid, the only thing I listened to was 3AW Sportsday, or Sports Today as it was then called. 6 till 7, Jared and Dwayne. It was awesome. Like I was obsessed with it. And then I started working on it, behind the scenes. Then they gave me a little spot at 6:15 to do, try to break news. And now I'm lucky enough to be co-hosting with Jared. And I take great pride in that someone in the industry has thought of me in the regard that they think I'm worthy enough of at least being a co-host with Jared. That's what I take pride in. That for me is huge to be able to have a byline on a newspaper like The Age. Like I take great pride in, because not everyone can have that. And there are great journos out there much better than me that haven't had bylines in newspapers for different reasons. And sometimes life's just about a little bit of luck. To host Footy Classified, has been huge for me, because again, like I'm comfortable hosting, and I have a weird thing where I don't really get nervous when I probably should. But the fact that someone at Channel 9 thought I'd be okay hosting that show, that have had an awesome host like Hutchie and Gary Lyon and, people that are TV greats, that I take pride in those things.
No, it must give you a lot of confidence, man, and a lot of really proud of yourself for getting to that, because like you said, it's a tough industry to break into, and especially at your age, I think like you'd be probably one of the youngest guys that are sort of cemented himself in the
probably too young in the end. Probably too young. I probably should have done some other stuff. Sometimes I think that maybe it's a little bit too much.
No, I think you learn on the go, and I think, like you said, you just keep adapting and learning to the things that work for you. But I'm going to bring up a couple of stories, because incredibly, you broke the story about the Adelaide training camp.
Yeah.
Which was pretty crazy in itself. Like that, I still don't really understand what happened there. I've been watching SAS a lot. I'm not trying to make this into a joke, but like I have been watching that show.
Thinking about it.
And it's bringing back, and I was like, fuck me, that is hectic.
Yeah.
These other guys, like, I don't know what happened there, but it must have been a lot sort of, pretty crazy. But how did that all come about, man? Like, because obviously there was a bit of a saga that happened at a training camp.
Yep.
And then there was rumblings of some unhappiness.
Yeah.
And then it sort of went away.
Yep. That's what happened.
And then what happened?
I decided to investigate, really. I mean, at the time you don't see it as that. You're just trying to find out what happened. And I spoke to a lot of people on the periphery, like people who had spoken to people that were there of, apparently this happened and apparently this happened. And I was like, okay, I need to put a timeline together here and work out what's misinformation and what's not. And then I said to myself, I have to speak to the people that were there. I'm just going to have to find out numbers the old fashioned way and just cold call people. And a lot of people hung up and some people answered and some people spoke, and then it was like, you can't write this, and no, I'm not happy. And then they'd hang up after 2 minutes, and then you'd ring them back 2 days later. And it was, like there's a lot of conjecture around this camp, and I think I'm still going through a little bit of it in a work sense, but that camp was never about. A lot of people think that I believe that this camp was meant to harm people. It wasn't. I'm sure that these people had the best intentions. I'm positive that they did. But some of the worst things that have ever happened started with the best intentions. And if there were 40 guys that went on the camp, it wasn't 40 that were upset by it. It probably wasn't even 20. But when you're, and I haven't been a footy player like you have, but I assume that when you go on camps like this, the overall desired outcome is that everyone is better because of it. Because if you have factions in groups, particularly in clubs, it doesn't work, right? Everyone needs to be on the same page. And there was a number of players who were scarred by it. And yeah, I mean, I talked before about a story that took me 18 months. This took me 18 months, to be able to speak to enough players with the promise of anonymity to be able to tell me what happened on that camp was big, and it sapped a lot of energy out of me. I can't imagine what it did to these players, and some of the trauma is still ongoing. The guys' collective mind who ran it, absolutely matter of fact that they didn't do anything illegal, they didn't do anything bad, that everyone loved the camp, and I think there's still some issues that will play out legally, but I don't regret anything that I did or wrote about that story, and I wouldn't take back one syllable of it.
I can imagine like writing that, so 18 months. Obviously a lot of prep goes in, you're fact checking, speaking to everyone. What's the feeling like before dropping it?
Oh, like it's just illness.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you just swallowed a full apple.
Yeah.
And you're just sitting on the couch feeling sick, and you just, I remember so I've only ever bought one paper with the thought of what's my story going to look like. I'm a bit weird like that. Go back to my weirdness with cars. I've never watched myself back on TV, and I know that I should. Like my bosses are listening to this now being like, how's he going to get better if he's not watching himself back? I just can't watch myself because, like you think, what are you doing with your hair, mate? Your forehead's the size of an airplane runway,
Talking about me.
No, that would be just the man in the mirror.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, I went, the day it dropped, I went around to the local milk bar and bought the paper, and I saw it and I was like, I just was relieved. Relieved that it was out and done. And then of course, there was the reaction.
What's the reaction like?
Oh, mixed, mate. Mixed. Yeah. I mean, I think it depends on who you speak to be honest. But I had a lot of players reach out that were really happy with how it was portrayed. I had a lot of people reach out that were unhappy, not of people that were involved in the story, but by people in Adelaide in particular. And the hardest thing for me with that, without being self-indulgent, was just the harassment on social media from people in Adelaide. And I've always maintained that like Adelaide supporters are some of the most loyal supporters you know, like absolutely rigid, would walk over hot coals for their club supporters in the league, as far as I'm concerned. But they were upset. They were upset that this story was making their football club look incompetent. You know, look like they fell asleep at the wheel and let people into their club that, you know, ultimately hurt them. But like, it comes back to that one of the original questions that you asked. You know, like, you can never please everyone. And I had to fall back on, I'm sure this upset a lot of people, but it's a story that had to be told. You know, these players were put through a lot. And so, yeah, I had some challenges with social media and, you know, with quitting Facebook and all that sort of stuff and the messages that came through. But that comes with the territory to a degree.
Let's talk about that, because that must be a pretty prevalent thing in your life. Like, we talk a lot about AFL players copying a lot of abuse, but I feel like one part of AFL, you've got a lot of people that sort of support you, and then there's also a lot of people where they're really against you. I feel like journalism sometimes is one of those things that it's like you're sort of devil's advocate. Like, you're asking the questions that people want to know, but they're so happy to read it and want to know it, but then they'll still slam you for producing it. Yeah,
particularly when it's written about people that they care about.
Yeah,
and that's the hardest thing.
So, how do you deal with that? Like, how bad? Well, first question is, how bad is some of this social media abuse? If you're happy to talk about that.
Yeah, no, I am. It's real bad. Yeah, I got a couple of death threats.
How would, like, what, through social media or?
Yeah, Instagram messaging, Facebook messaging, the two biggest ones.
People that you can see their actual profiles.
Yeah, and like people that are holding kids in their profile photos.
101, if you're going to threaten to kill someone, you don't leave your profile there.
Yeah, and then
what do you do with that?
I just ignore it. I think the best thing was to ignore. If I got one now, I'd go to the police, but then I didn't. I probably should have. The hardest thing that I found is you don't want to tell anyone, because it doesn't really impact me. Like, I just know that people get angry and they say things they don't mean, and ultimately it doesn't impact my life and or my mental health. But if I share that with Nisha, my partner, or with Maddie or with my mum, even if I'd share it as a joke, you know, I'd be on the couch, look what this guy said to me. They get really upset. And I learnt that the hard way, and they don't want to see it, but they also want to know about it, you know, so it's a really hard balance. So I now just basically, anyone that I don't know that messages, before I even open it, I just swipe and delete. And it's hard because sometimes people write really nice messages, and I get a lot of emails because I put my email on my Instagram from kids that are finishing school, and they're like, how did you get into journalism? And I want to try to help them. But yeah, some of the hate is vitriolic, and it surprises me sometimes. But I'm lucky because I think what I've been through previously in life, I've got a fairly good perspective on what's important and what's not. And I've built a pretty thick skin. So I'm able to fob it off a little bit. And you know what the funny thing is that say there's 500 messages of hate, right, since the last 10 years. Not one person has ever walked up to me in the street and said anything like that, or anything even half bad. You know, like the one time that someone has approached me I was at the Richmond Club Hotel on Swan Street. This is a couple of years ago, and I just sat down for dinner with one of my best mates. We were having a beer, and this guy walked past with like a tray of, must have had like 8 pints on it, and he clearly had a couple. It was daytime, so he'd been in the sun and he was having a grand old time. And he walked past, and he sort of looked at me and then kept walking and then stopped, and he just walked back in reverse, like holding this. And he looked at me and he said, you know what, Sam, you know what? No, come here, you know what? I know that most people think that you're a prick, but I actually don't mind you. And he walked off. And my mate Jack at the time he said to me, that is far and beyond the best thing that has ever happened in my life. Yeah. And I laughed.
A backhanded compliment, isn't it?
Yeah, but I took it really positively because, you know, like, I'm very well aware of what people must think of me, but there's also not that many people that know me very well. So I've learned to just deal with, there's a group of people whose opinion of me I deeply respect, and everyone else it's like, well, you know, people are going to think what they're going to think.
Through this as well, and this is a question I I don't know the answer to. Like, can you regret some things? Have you ever regretted anything you put out?
Yep.
Early days? Have you ever like gone, nah, probably shouldn't have done that?
Yeah, definitely.
On this topic, have you had any other run-ins with any other players where you've gone like, they've said, this is a story, I want to run it, I don't now. Like, has anything changed, or have you sort of eased over them?
Yeah, there was a story at the start of this year, actually. I won't name the player. About a guy it was a really fascinating story. Because of the timing of an injury and the timing of when he signed a contract, he was basically losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. And like one of the really good players of the competition was probably earning just over average or something like that. Like, it was, the financial differences were huge. And I went back to my rule and I was like, okay, I'm writing about this guy, I'm going to have to ring him. So I got his number, rang him. He's like, really appreciate you ringing. What you're telling me is true. The story is true. It was bad luck. You know, this was what happened here. This is when I signed. This is why I'm earning less. And I said, okay, well, you know, I'm going to write it. And he said, well, okay, well, I don't want any, you know, you haven't spoken to me. You don't want any quotes. So I wrote it, and it was a good story. It was going to be on the back page. And he rang me back a few hours later and said, I don't want you to write it anymore. I had to think about it, and I don't need the attention. And I was like, well, mate, I've already written it. Like, you know, I've told my editor about it. He's like, well, you decide whether you write it or not. So I didn't. So I rang my editor and I explained the situation. I was like, it's not worth it. Like, it's like, we can either run this tomorrow and this guy will always remember that he asked me not to and I still did, or we leave it. And then the next time I ring him, he'll think, that's right, I can trust him because he rang me, I gave him the info, I gave him the green light, and then I changed my mind and he still didn't.
That's pretty huge. I think, like you said, and where you're at now, relationships with players would be the most important thing for you.
Definitely.
Really.
Number 1, 2 and 3.
You're never going to get them on again, really. And with the relationship side of things, I suppose this is where I'm probably getting with this is, and again, we've known each other for a while, but something that I think was really cool, and to get the backstory, I don't know, but with earlier in the year, Jack Stephen.
Yeah.
There was an incident that obviously something happened. No one really knows what happened in that situation, but you were, I'm not sure if you were sent there or you were there to ask him some questions.
Yep.
And I can imagine, you know, your people were saying, we need answers, you need to ask him this, and you didn't.
Yeah, so I wasn't there. I wasn't in Geelong at the time, but I had been working behind the scenes for several weeks to ascertain what had happened. How did it come to be that an AFL footballer was stabbed? Who was it by? What are the circumstances? Stuff that's really sensitive, you know, stuff that involves police, stuff that involves relationships, stuff that, I think, you know, he's got a child as well, so it's ultra sensitive. And it somehow got a life of its own when I think I was on Footy Classified and Eddie Maguire was criticising the media. I think he might have been doing his radio and then it happened on TV, and he was like, you know, he said something to the point where if back in the day, if that had happened and I'd asked you to go down and ask the question, Jack, why were you stabbed? Because no one asked him why were you stabbed, even though he'd clearly made it clear to people, I don't want to be asked.
He hasn't told anyone, let alone why would he tell a newspaper?
That's right.
Yeah. And
so Eddie said something like, if you went down there and didn't ask, it would have been, don't bother coming back, because he would have been sacked. And I was like, well, hang on a bit. Hang on a second. Hang on just a second. You know, like, we are constantly in this day and age criticised for being journos, for being too harassing, and we write everything that we get our hands on. And yet this is a bloke who, if he had been stabbed an inch left or right, could have lost his life, right? That's just the reality of the situation. Has been to hospital and has clearly had something going on that has led to this event that he doesn't want talked about. I think we can afford him that right of not talking about a heinous incident in his life that's very, very private and very, very personal. So I remember he went on, I think it was Triple M radio the next morning, and I was getting attacked left, right and centre for, you know, like picking and choosing. And I tweeted something along the lines of, I don't know, it was, you wouldn't have to sack me. You know, like, I just resign if that was how people thought. And then the Herald Sun, an hour later, the Herald Sun like journalist threatens to resign over Stephen. And I was like, wow. And I'm getting my mum calling me being like, have you quit? What happened? Why do you even have to be on Twitter? It's just like, this is unbelievable. Like all I've done is tried to stand up for the rights of one person who doesn't want to talk about something that's happened in his life. Plenty of stuff that you and I wouldn't want to talk about in an open forum. Just because he's a footballer doesn't entitle us to more or less information. It entitles us to criticise them when they make mistakes on the field and entitles us to criticise them when they do things when they're punished by their club off the field. But left and right of that, they're human beings doing a job. So, and the other thing I found really funny from everyone that was commenting on it is that it was assumed that I didn't know the circumstances. So I had done my job to the best of my ability. I knew what happened. I decided not to ask him because I knew that he didn't want to talk about it. I think that's fair and reasonable.
Do you think as well, and like with that point, I feel you've made a massively correct call there, because as a past player, not that I was ever getting journos chasing me, but the more not to be seen to be looking after players and getting them out of trouble, but people respect that. And then, like you said earlier, they come back to you when they've actually got something and they want to tell you something.
Yep. And that, like, for me, that's the hardest thing.
That's the toe the line.
That's the hardest line to toe. When is it okay to annoy them and go against what they want and write it? Because you can't have it all the other way, right? You can't have, if the biggest story in the world broke and then you rang the bloke and he said, no, please don't write it. You can't listen to him on that occasion. You have to do my job. But when is it okay to be like, okay, I can forego that because I think that there are circumstances around it which provide context. But, the next time that I call or the next time that you want your story told, I'm hoping that you would come to me, as someone that you can trust.
What would you want a member of the general public that, consumes AFL media, that, loves footy, that reads articles, what would you want them to know about journalism rather than the fact that like people are out to get people or they're just here to write stories?
Yeah, I think without speaking on anyone's behalf, I would think that the vast majority of people get into journalism because they want to tell true and accurate and interesting stories that people read and that better their days. I think ultimately that's what we all want to do. Some stories are really hard to write. Some stories are easy. That's just the reality. And, also, I don't know if you know or read Richard Baker and Nick McKenzie, the investigative reporters from The Age, and the stuff that they've been writing about hotel quarantine and what's happened in Afghanistan with these killings. And it's like, I read these stories and I'm just like, these are life-changing stories. I write about footy. And I love what I do, and I understand it's important in the footy industry and all that sort of stuff. But let's provide some context a little bit here and some perspective
of how important it actually. Yeah,
we write about footy. We write about players. We are there because of the game, not the other way around.
In terms of media now, and I know he's touched on it. In your eyes, is there any negatives there that you'd like to see gone? Is there like pet peeves that you don't like about your own industry?
Yeah, clickbait.
Yeah.
You know what I hate? I hate when, I'll give you an example. When Jack Stephen retired, was it last week, I think?
Yep.
And everyone knew that he'd retired, and St Kilda. Geelong put out a press release. I think St Kilda did as well, given that he was a 5-time BNF winner, being like, Jack's decided to call time in his career, wonderful player, blah, blah, blah. I remember seeing a headline on a newspaper site, which was Jack Stephen has made a call on whether he's playing or not next year. It's like, you really think we're that dumb that we have to click on it to like... One thing I was always taught when I started radio was your audience is not stupid. Your audience is actually very intelligent. So don't talk to them like children. I've always lived by that. So this whole clickbait thing that we have arrived at is so dangerous.
And just on that, you touched on that before because I had never thought about it in this aspect. But basically that clickbait is to click to show advertisers to then get paid.
Yeah, so...
That's what it is. It's to make money.
It doesn't happen at The Age.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to talk on behalf of other news outlets. But I know for a fact, because I've spoken to journalists, that there are journalists out there who get bonuses based on
Clicks.
So it's like if you were getting paid to get more kicks, you'd probably try to get more kicks and handball less.
I tried.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
If I'm getting paid to get more clicks, that changes the way I write and report a story. So it's really dangerous. So I actually reckon, whether it's in 1 year or 100 years, I don't know. I reckon we'll get to a point where a media owner will come out and say, you know what? I am happy to make this amount less if it means we can improve the quality. Because we can all make less money. We can. We just have to make it. It's just really hard being like, I am now pouring 20% of that revenue out the window and someone else can go and get it.
It looks like that's why sort of reputable newspapers now do subscriptions.
Yep.
Because they're losing money through the other ways.
That's right. So, but I just reckon there's going to, and COVID hasn't helped this, but there's going to have to be a point. I think there'll be a turning point where we go back the other way and just go, you know what? Instead of putting out 25 stories an hour and putting it into sport, we're going to do 6 stories a day, and they're all going to be 1,000 words, and they're all going to be high quality with facts and quotes. And when we tweet them out and put them on Facebook and Instagram, they will be there available as they are. No leading hashtags, no clickbait, no trying to put a stupid photo on something so someone clicks on it. The biggest stat that I think that gets overlooked with newspapers in particular is time spent. That's the biggest stat.
Time spent reading?
Time spent reading. You want the higher that is, you know that it's good because people read it. People are reading further. They want to know more.
Oh, it's incredible, mate. I can't thank you enough for your insight today. It has been very insightful.
It's very exciting.
Honestly has, and I hope that it's given insight for you as well, because I know your role is tough and you're doing something that you love, but sometimes people can see that as you're out there to do something that you're not meaning to do. But I know that you're doing that in a good way. Yeah,
we're not out there trying to hurt people. In fact, I think most of the time we're trying to do the opposite, but we get perceived in a certain way by people, and that's fine, by the way. You know, people are going to think what they want to think.
It's tough, man. I'll give it to you. Like, the resilience of a journo would have to be up there with AFL, like an elite sportsman. Nearly.
I don't know how players do it. I don't know how their image has just become public property.
Suppose, the only thing that's different. The only thing that's different between a player is you're getting judged on your performance. Yeah. Whereas a journo, that's your opinion. So it's sort of like you're getting judged on your opinion, whereas a footy player gets judged on their performance. That's not actually, if they're playing bad, doesn't mean they're a bad person. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah, I do. And then there's getting judged on what we were talking about before, on news. Can't believe you wrote that. Yeah, well, that's just, you dog. I think most people understand that that's quite silly. To finish up, what's next for your career, man? Because you're so young and you've done so much already. You should be extremely proud of yourself. What's next for you? What do you want to move into? You're doing a lot at the moment. Obviously, as we said, we got the Age, Footy Classified, Sportsday. What's next? Short answer is I don't know. The longer answer is I just want to kind of keep developing different parts of my writing. Every time I pick up the paper, I'm blown away by how good the quality of writing is, and I think how am I writing? I can't write like these people. So I'd like to do some short courses, write more. I'd love to do some creative writing, and just keep speaking to people, keep interviewing people. I'm really lucky what I do in radio because we get to do that for a couple of hours every night, Jared and I, which is great. And then whatever happens with TV will happen. It's exciting times, man. I can't thank you enough for coming on, sharing your insight. Mate, thanks for having me. It's been great. As you said, man, you've done a lot, and it's really exciting to get in there. I think it's going to open up a lot of minds, even mine. You know, there were so many questions there that I didn't know the answer to, and just getting a backstory into the media and how it actually works, not as a whole. There's definitely different. The media. I'm going to write a movie one day. I'm going to call it The Media. No, it's been awesome, mate. Thank you so much. Thanks, Can't thank you enough, and look forward to catching up for a few beers soon. Thanks, mate.